Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusril and welcome once again to the Tribble Timewarp. It is the 6th of April 2014 and we'll start with a little detail that got pointed out to me by one of the viewers. Many thanks for this, I missed it. There is an event of decompression advice decal in Spacedock now. 1. Breathe out. 2. Tap your comm badge 3 times to trigger your distress beacon. And 3. Find the emergency evac suit. If there are more people than suits, well, you're out of luck, guys. Sorry about that. In addition, the Earth Spacedock situation holo has been updated. These were just placeholders before. They're now actual ships, and there are several shoutouts, most notably the USS Pasteur, the USS Lakota, which is somehow still in service 40 years and more after the Defiant shot it up, and the USS Rhode Island from Voyager's Endgame. Most of those ships are nods of one form or another to various points. In addition, their positions are synchronized with the positions outside the window, so when the Odyssey or the Sovereign come flying past on their orbits, then the holograms will do likewise. In fact, we ought to have the Sovereign coming past any moment now, but just keep an eye out for it, guys. Let's move on to the meat of today's episode. The reputation system has had a major revamp. The new 8472 counter command is in its early iteration. The reputation abilities are in, as are the unlocks. Unfortunately, we don't as yet have those on the Drazana terminals, so I can't show them to you just yet. In addition, new Romulus, Nukara and Omega have been revamped to bring them into line with the Dyson style. So whereas before the file situation report and submit research materials required various commodities and other materials, it's now just flat marks, expertise and energy credits to get things done. There is one 20-hour mission that requires, I believe it's 30 marks per, 2,000 expertise and 15,000 energy credits, which is pretty easy to get hold of, gives you 2,500 reputation, 340 dilithium and a Task Force Omega requisition. It's worth noting that this does not appear to be tiered. You'll notice it just says Task Force Omega Equipment Requisition, whereas if I go over to the Dyson requisitions, you can see that these are in fact tiered. It remains to be seen whether or not the quality will change. I don't think it will. I think they have just packaged up some of the dilithium unlocks and put them in as chances to drop from these boxes. The side missions remain unchanged. 500 dilithium ore for 50 marks, 1000 dilithium ore for 3 neural processors. Incidentally, that's down from 5, I tell a lie. So they do need to update the text description from that. And of course the claim sponsorship is there if you should need it for an alt. So that's both the Sovereign and the Soval coming past, just to illustrate my point. If we check the hologram, you can see we've got the Soval going around along with the Sovereign as well. Actually, no, are they in... No, they're not quite in sync, are they? That's drifted a little. Also, yeah. Not quite sure what's going on there. They were more or less in line. Sovereign was a little ahead. That's not quite right. Cryptic might need to take a quick look at that. Anyway, back onto topic. So, you have a new mission as well, continued support for each of the task forces. This is an interesting mission. It doesn't appear to be tier related. It's available for me on the Undine tier, even though obviously I've got nothing there. It gives you no reputation, but you do get 340 dilithium ore and a requisition box for a fairly generous 20 marks, 1000 expertise and 7,500 entries. Obviously this is on a 1 hour cooldown. Not quite sure why Cryptic have put that in. It's a quick way of getting a bit of dilithium and gear, but we already had that in the shape of the, where has it gone? The ongoing war efforts, and similar allowed us to turn in excess marks for dilithium. In fact, this new mission is even more efficient. Even if you disallow the gear, that is a 10-to-1 return per mark. The new mission is for let me see, 340 for 20. That's a 17 to 1 return. Actually, no, it's even better than that. That's more like 20 something to 1. Oh wow. I must admit I had thought that was 17 Omega marks for some reason. Shows what I know. So that is certainly the more efficient way of turning marks into dilithium. However, of course, it's slower. It has the 1 hour cooldown. The previous version only has the 15 seconds. Now let's quickly plonk this up to speed because I want to look at this box. Handily, Cryptic put in some shortcut items for us on Drozana, so I've got a lot of Omega marks. There's nothing for 8472, however. So we have an Omega box, we have a Tholium box once I get it done. And we'll grab a new Romulus box as well. As I say, these don't appear to be tier locked, so you can get pretty much anything from them within limits. So, the Omega box. Info. You have got a very rare chance of a Mark 12 anti-proton weapon, very low chance of a Borg processor, and a pretty reliable chance of getting a Mark 11 anti-proton ground weapon. Interesting that there is no space option here. There used to be an anti-Borg space modifier, and it would have been a good opportunity to bring that back in as, say, anti-proton beam arrays or cannons. Maybe they'll do that. However, let's pop it open and see what we have. Anti-proton wide beam pistol, crit severity, knockback, and Borg. Actually, that's kind of handy. Knockback's always useful against Borg drones. And there you go, 10% additional damage versus Borg, Delta's kinetic damage. That's been tweaked, actually. The anti-Borg modifier used to be a flat damage boost, fairly potent one as well in space. So I must admit I am a little surprised that Cryptic haven't brought that back for space weapons. Actually, I've got some legacy weapons on one of my characters buried somewhere. We'll have to see what comes up with those. I'll have to do a character transfer though, or will I? Anyway, back on topic, I'm wondering. The Nukara box. So here you've got very rare refracting tetrions, very rare sonic antiprotons, or a very rare environment suit, more likely to be Mark 11 than Mark 12. Use that, and we've got refracting tetrion dual heavies. Obviously the refracting is the first modifier, then you've got crit, D, and damage as the second and third modifiers for a total of 3. And on the Romulan side, Romulan plasma weapon or Romulan plasma space weapon. So we'll just use this, see what we get. Romulan plasma protection, again the Romulan upgrade. It's essentially merged, giving you both the disruptor and the plasma ground procs. Damage and knockback 3, not too shabby. Bear in mind these are tier 0, these are going to be immediately available to any new characters, and you begin to understand just how quickly we'll be able to gear up a new alt with this new system. For the more potent stuff, just clear that, the abilities have had a revamp in places. Most notable, I think, is the sensor targeting assault. So your next outgoing critical hit will take the target's weapons offline. This is completely passive if you have it enabled. So every 20 seconds your next crit will take the target's weapons offline for 4 seconds. There is also reactive shielding, disabling strikes, and somewhere in here, yep, emergency secondary shields. Yeah, a couple of very handy passives, plus 10% shields and plus 4% critical hit chance. Some of these are quite nice. It's also worth noting that the Mark 10 and Mark 11 versions of Reputation Equipment have been completely, and I mean completely, removed. You cannot get them anymore. So if you've got them, hang on to them. They're shortly about to become rather interesting antiques, if nothing else. So it's Mark 12 from the get-go. Again, this has been brought into line with the Dyson Sphere because I imagine nobody was bothering to slog up through Mark 10 and 11 Omega when they could just go for Mark 12 Dyson. So, Tier 1 Omega, Mark 12 shields on the ground. Again, you've got the adapted Mark 12 shields available at this tier as well, which is a bit of an oddity because of course you have to have the entire Mark 12 ground set, and the final piece, the weapons, don't become available until the final tier. Sorry, no, that's the personal armour, isn't it? My bad. Right, so why Cryptic didn't just put the adapted sets in as a tier 5 line, I do not know. It's a bit awkward to say, hey guys, you can get the adapted versions. Oh wait, actually no, you can't. You need to get all the way up to tier 5 before you can get the last piece to unlock this. I'm not sure why these are even being mentioned here, because let's face it, you can't get them at tier 1, can you? Tier 2 gives you the anti-proton ground weapons, the cutting beam, as well as the deflector dishes, both the assimilated, Mako and Honor Guard versions, again along with the adapted versions. And again, if we go up, you have to get to tier 5 to get the final piece of the set and unlock the adapted sets. So again, the same comment applies. Why is this adapted set not just a line item at tier 5, just to slim things down a bit? Interestingly, the tier 2 anti-combat consumables are now in tier 4. I'm not sure if that's a typo or deliberate, along with the prosthetic arm weapons and the Omega launcher. That was always a Mark 12 item from the get-go. Liberated Borg duty officers are in tier 3. Maybe move those up into tier 4 just to spread things out a bit. Personal weapons are tier 3 as well. Again, adapted versions, etc, etc. Incidentally, costume unlock projects, again typo here. There is no Mark 11 ground set anymore. Anyhow, there's a lot of little cosmetic bits and pieces that need to be tidied up. Again, with the Tholians, the Mark 11 set has gone. Interestingly, reprogrammed drones to space? No, it isn't. Unless they have really changed the drones since I last looked at them. So, the big thing, really big thing, is the way that the traits have been reworked. Previously, of course, if you were working your way up the reputation trait tracks, you got to pick one trait at each tier. So if I got to tier 1 Nukara, I had to choose between either identify vulnerability or plus 10% health in the shape of Indomitable. You couldn't have both, and it was a fairly expensive little business to reset them. Now, however, you can mix and match a lot more. You have 9 personal traits at maximum level, as before, and you can swap these around completely freely. It no longer requires a respec token to do so. You can basically change these around on the fly, muck about with them as you like. You also have 4 space and 4 ground slots for reputation tiers. So, for example, I can have medical nanites, weapon proficiency, identify vulnerability, and Indomitable at the same time. However, bear in mind that there are 8 shortly to be, in fact there's far more than that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 available traits, shortly to go up probably to 20 given the Undine rep track. We'll take a look at that in a second. And you can pick any 4th. And that's how it works. So you can basically tweak these on the fly. If I want to go healer, I no longer have to choose, for example, between proficiency and nanites. I can have both. Well, hey. On the downside, I have to now choose only 4 out of the set rather than half of them. So it's a bit of swings and roundabouts. We'll have to see what happens as people start to identify killer combos and the system beds in. Expect more on that as we draw nearer to Season 9. There are also 4 active reputation slot abilities. These are the Tier 5 items. Now there is a new one for the Undine, Biomolecular Shield Generator, Space Active. It dumps a shield generator into space. It's actually kind of handy if you look at the numbers. 22% reduction to shield damage, 12.7 repair per second, which isn't quite so handy. It's the incoming shield hardening that's the main advantage of that generator. For the moment, of course, you don't have to choose. There are only 4 factions, 4 slots, woohoo. it's also a bit of a no-brainer anyway, because you can flick freely. So if I'm in space, well, I've no use for Defiance, have I? I can just pop the Undine generator in instead. And if I'm on the ground, well, I'm not going to have use for Singularity Manipulation or the Refracting Cascade. Pop those out and load my ground powers instead. Given that we are going to need probably 8 or 9 reputation factions before that becomes a serious issue, you can begin to see why Cryptic haven't really mentioned it in their patch notes. It's not a big deal at the moment. You don't really have any choice to make. You just have to remember to flick the slots when you move from space to ground so everything is lined up. Now, the Undine 8472 counter command, which is interesting that in and of itself, because of course the Undine name replaced the Borg designation, species 8472, so I am a little surprised that we have gone back to it, but hey, not me to question it, and it's certainly easier to say Undine versus 8472. Actually no, Undine is less syllables, so there. Who cares? So, powers. Tier 1, we have Mental Acuity, 10% bonus while aiming, and Mental Conditioning, 20 Psionic Resist, 15 Control Resistance rating. 15 Control Resist? Oh wow, are the Undine going to be chucking around mind control powers on the ground? We shall see. There is a new ground mission in for the Undine, which we'll have to take a look at some point. Tier 2, 3% accuracy for 15 seconds every time you use a Tactical Bridge Officer ability. This can stack up to 5 times. Remains to be seen whether or not it will stack if you are cycling multiple options over an extended period, or if it just drops after the final stack goes on and expires. If you can refresh it, of course, then that's basically plus 15% accuracy across the board for every weapon, and basically once your escort gets going, that's basically a weapon upgrade and a half, isn't it? So I can see a lot of escort captains being very happy with that one. Cruiser and science captains, perhaps less so. Over on this side, component redistribution, so anti-proton resistance bonus and resistance to control effects as well. I have to admit, that is not nearly as potent once it gets going. I mean, anti-proton resist is handy to be sure, but bleh. And in any event, crucial component redistribution almost makes me think of more resistance to systems going offline than just, hey, we've painted this new anti-proton resistant compound on the hull. Have fun, guys. Maybe that could use a rework, who knows. Maybe a hot restart of any offline system on, say, a 30-second cooldown. How does that sound? Anyway, empathic adaptation. We're back on the ground for tier 3. Shield hardness increases when you're hitting ground combat, doubled against psionic damage, stacks up to 5 times. So normally it's a 20% chance to increase hardening by 5%, and that goes up to 40% against psionic damage. Again, stacks up to 5 times, lasts to 15 seconds. Again, we need to see whether or not that will refresh once it hits 5 stacks and you get hit the next time. Counterpart is empathic reverberation. This reflects damage when hitting ground combat. Again, damage doubled. Only a 5% chance of the reflection, but it is a 50% reflect. So, yeah. It's worth noting also that this is on an internal cooldown. It can only trigger more than once every 10 seconds. Or rather, it can only trigger once every 10 seconds. What's wrong with me this episode? Nanoprobe Field Generator, Tier 4, we're starting to get into the good stuff. Well, normally I'd say we're starting to get into the good stuff. The good stuff actually happened at Tier 2. Very definite power spike on some of those abilities. Field Generator, so Space Combat, 10% chance to increase shield hardening by 15 per 5 seconds. So you can potentially get your shield hardening up by 25%. Again, we have the question of whether or not it refreshes under repeated weapon strikes once you have 5 stacks. You've really got to get hit multiple times to get that up. So 10% chance. I'd have to sit down and do the maths to work out how often you'd need to be hit to reliably get the full 25% shot. Mind you, 10 shots in 15 seconds. If you've got a couple of frigates shooting at you, that's not going to be too hard, I would think. And nanoprobe feedback, again this is similar. Chance to reflect directed energy damage. Note that this is not kinetic damage. And it doubles against Undine. Again, it's on a 10-second internal cooldown, and it's a 10% reflection chance. Reflects 100%. I'd love to see what happens if you get hit by one of the Borg mega weapons in Hive Elite. That could be interesting. And the final version, as I said earlier, is the biomolecular generator. As for the unlocks, there's not a lot to show at the moment. They are not available in the Drozana's store, and I need to start grinding this up on the quiet. However, store unlock at Tier 1 is the biomolecular rifle weapon Mark 12. I'm assuming biomolecular is going to be an anti-Undine proc in the way that we've got the anti-Borg proc here. But even so, Mark 12, very rare, even at effectively blue quality against anyone. Those are going to be pretty decent weapons. They're also probably going to be expensive in terms of dilithium. We've also got the console and the personal shield. Wake up to Tier 2. Yes, that's an obelisk carrier. Cryptic have a tendency to copy and paste the faction and plug things in as needed rather than build the same thing from scratch each time. Can't blame it, it's a handy time saver. Tier 2 passive abilities as detailed. The assault ground weapons, so miniguns and shotguns, pulse waves, as well as the deflector and this new enhanced photon torpedo. We'll have to see what that's capable of. And yes, this is the reason why the biomolecular torpedo was pulled out of the Mind Games episode. Tier 3, projectile space weapons, so the various torpedo types, I assume. It's nice to see we're getting some choice here, even if I imagine the basic photon enhanced torpedo is going to potentially sink the lot of them. Then again, some builds do benefit much more from having a tricobalt device than a photon tube, particularly the slow turning builds, so we'll see what happens. Also, will this include mines? We'll have to find out. So, biomolecular phaser and disruptor rifles, I assume these are going to be faction specific, although it doesn't say so. We also get the hyper impulse engines, as well as some kit modules. Now, medical generator, photon grenade, very nice for engine tactical. Sonic pulse, okay, hands up science captains. When was the last time any of us actually used sonic pulse on a regular basis? I can't help but thinking science have had the short end of the stick there. Tier 4 gets us the warp cores, both singularity and matter-antimatter type. Interestingly, that's a hyper-injection core. It looks like this is going to be an escort set. Well, fair enough. The cruisers had their chance to play when we did the Dyson set, so very much was the escort's time to have some gear optimized for them. Heavy turrets, I believe those are trading fire rate for damage. We'll have to see what the DPS output looks like on them once they get into the game. Again, phaser and disruptor. Again, I suspect that these are going to be faction specific, even though there's no evidence to the contrary in the descriptions here. We also get the generic beam and cannon weapons in the store. Again, I suspect these are going to be expensive in terms of dilithium. Also makes me curious that they're not bringing back the Borg modifier in space, if they're going to do a straight anti-Undine modifier, but we'll have to find out exactly what the biomolecular mod does to a weapon. And finally, in Tier 5, we have, well, the good stuff. The Mark 12 kit frames. We'll see. I'm honestly not sure. I'm assuming that is an inbuilt ability or passive bonus that they're getting, along with the exo armor and the shield arrays. Relatively slim pickings at Tier 5. You need it to complete the set and, well, not a lot else. Of course, that shield generator could be quite handy in a given set of circumstances. So, that pretty much wraps it up. We have new traits, various minor tweaks to Spacedock, and the core of the reputation system's latest revamp is in. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been Yusel. That has been the Tribble Timewarp. We'll have to start doing some Undine missions on a regular basis, see what some of the new shinies look like. And until next time, remember, breathe out and tap your comm badge 3 times. Farewell.